Hello and welcome to Digital Tabletop Festival for Roll of the Dice Edition. My name is Jess Rutland, my pronouns are they, them, and I work at Auroch Digital. I'm here today to moderate our lovely panel of guests on hoping to unpick the question of why are bad rolls good? So I'm going to just loop around quickly and pick on people. Nate, starting off with you. If you could kindly just give everybody your name, your role, your studio, and the games you're here to talk about today.
Yeah. My name is Nate Austin, he, him. I work at Worldwalker Games, LLC. We made Wildermyth, and right now we are working on some DLC for Wildermyth called Omen Road, which will be coming out pretty soon.
Nice one. And over to you, Gareth.
Hi, yeah, I'm Gareth Damian Martin, they, them. I make games as the studio Jump Over the Age as a kind of mostly solo developer, and I'll probably mostly be talking about Citizen Sleeper and the upcoming Citizen Sleeper 2 that's in development right now, but I also made a game called In Other Waters that doesn't have any dice in it.
We love it. And Justin.
Yeah, I'm Justin Keenan. He, him is fine. I'm a writer, narrative designer at Zaum, and I worked on Disco Elysium in the Final Cut. And there's lots of dice in that one.
Lots of dice, just a few, one or two, I think, if I remember rightly. So thank you, everyone. It's really nice to have you all here today. I'm going to start off with an easy one for everyone, just to warm us up a little bit. So my first question is, how do dice rolls work in your game? If everyone can just give us a quick, couple-minute download of what is the role that dice have in your game, if any. Over to you, Justin.
Yeah, so on Disco, we use a pretty simple 2d6 system. When you encounter a check in the game, there's a difficulty threshold associated with it, and that is you roll the dice, add your skill and that associated thing, and then any bonuses or modifiers. And if you meet the threshold, good. If you don't, interesting in a different way.
Nice. And Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, Citizen Sleeper is a little different from a kind of standard dice system in games. If people haven't played Citizen Sleeper, then it's important to note that you play a kind of android with a kind of emulated human mind, and as part of that, your emulated mind and your body are kind of falling apart after you escape from the corporation that built you. Because of that, to represent that, we have a dice system where every cycle, every kind of day in the game, there's no days in space, but so we call them cycles, but you roll a number of dice, and then those dice, 5d6s you start with, and those dice are kind of what you have to work with for that day. So you might roll 5 1s, you might roll 5 6s or anything in between, and you use those to do tasks and to kind of try to survive. As your health declines, you get less dice each day, so you also are kind of trying to survive within very difficult circumstances. But at the same time, because you have a hand of dice essentially that you're dealt every day, then there's like a kind of luck. You can account for your luck by kind of choosing how to use them, basically. So if there's something you really want to go well, you can use your high level dice for that. And if you don't care about something, you might use low level dice. There's also little wrinkles to it that when you use a dice and assign it, you don't unless it's a 6, you don't for sure get an outcome. It's still then a percentage roll based on the dice, which is a little bit more nuanced. So it's kind of like, I could go through all the numbers, but it'd be pretty boring to explain it, and I don't think would make sense to anybody. But basically, the lower the number, the worse the chance of a good outcome, and the higher the number, the better the chance of a good outcome. So there's a kind of hybrid dice system going on in Citizen Sleeper.
Thank you. That was a really great explanation summary for how dice work. I was about to say, here is the Excel spreadsheet that I made earlier explaining every single one of the roles in the game and how that works with all the skills as well. But we won't waste everyone's time for now. Nate, how about you? Are there dice rolls in your game? And if so, how do they work?
Yeah, they are abstracted a bit. We don't do D20s or D6s or so much, but there's a lot of randomness, and we like to show the percent values to the player, especially for attacks ahead of time. Not technically dice, but there's a lot of that, and we try to be extremely upfront and fair about. You have a 75% chance, you have a 90% chance, and that's always exactly accurate.
Mm. I think that's the interesting part as well, when what you were saying, that you don't necessarily have dice, but you do have these percentage chances, because in a way, to me, they kind of feel interchangeable. When you are rolling a dice, that's what you're doing, is you're making that percentage chance roll there and then in the moment. You don't actually know which way it's going to go. And when it comes to this digital space rather than the physical space, that is a role that's happening behind the scenes for the player anyway. It's not something they tangibly have in their hands to control per se. So it is more behind the scenes. I think for us, one of our games, Mars Horizon, is a strategy simulation game where you are a space agency. You manage a space agency. You're off to be the first agency to land on Mars, which is pretty cool. And within the game, we have reliability for rocket launches and success rates for the rockets to launch and what will happen to them. And in the way that I kind of imagine it behind a screen, it is just like you're rolling a D100, right? You're rolling that percentage dice in the background, and you're telling the player, okay, you've got a 75% chance here, you've got an 80%, a 90% chance here. And that's the information the player has to work with, and it's on them to make that kind of risk assessment. And I suppose and conversely, with Justin and Gareth as well, like you have your preset of dice, or you have your skills, so you already have some information to work with already that will give you more favor or less favor on a particular check. So I was kind of wondering as well, like, how does the interplay come in when you've got your skills, for example? So say it's your savoir-faire in Disco, or say, Gareth, you've got a mechanist and they've got really high engineering skill. How do you work with knowing that the player is able to make that risk assessment based on the skills they already have in that moment? Justin, if you're able to answer that one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, in as I said, Disco uses a pretty straightforward 2d6 system, and that is to, we wanted Disco to evoke that feeling of a tabletop experience, and so part of why we went with 2d6 is that it's like legible even to non-tabletop nerds. Even if you've never played a TTRPG, you probably know that like snake eyes are bad, boxcars are good, and people have like a pretty good intuition of like what that probability curve looks like, and like 2d6 have a really just a nice curve that way. But also, like when you're rolling a check, we also surface the percentage odds, and I think there's even like a little text label that says that kind of describes like how good your shot at it is. So for us, it was important, for a game that has a lot of pretty weighty, dark, heavy themes. The mechanical side of it is like very friendly and accessible. And so, we want the player to always kind of know what sort of chance they're taking. Those are also kind of balanced out in a way by something I didn't talk about earlier, which are the passive checks, which are not dice rolls per se, but kind of hidden threshold checks that we have hidden throughout dialogues in the game, where you get a little moment of anticipation when you see that kind of continue bar at the bottom of the screen, which will be colored in the according to the attribute that's about to be belonging to the skill that's about to be checked. And those are more about kind of adding, call it flavor or kind of subtle bits of like character shading, as you move through. But when it comes to the rules themselves, the parts where we trick and play with the player are in the outcomes themselves, not in the particulars of the roles.
Okay. I really like that, and I'm glad you mentioned the passive checks as well, because again, it's another layer of chance, I suppose. That's just an element that's also ticking away in the background for players to anticipate in some way.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way, it's totally deterministic, right? Like you will set those things, you'll determine what clothes you're wearing, what substances you've taken that kind of modify those skill thresholds. But the from the player's perspective, it does feel like chance, and that's
Yeah.
like kind of the beauty of it, right? Is that you're working with asymmetrical information in that way, and that creates that feeling of if not randomness, then like spontaneity, which is pretty important, I think, because we're also simulating the kind of like workings of a like a damaged human consciousness, and that kind of feeling of like, where did that thought come from? I didn't know that was back there. Is extremely important to dramatize somehow.
Yeah, I think that connects kind of to Citizen Sleeper's use of dice in that way and percentages, because it's interesting the way it's really about exposing, choosing to use dice is about kind of exposing information in a particular frame, right? We could use percentage or dice, but the choice to use dice is about wanting to draw associations or to give that information in a certain way. And in Citizen Sleeper, it was kind of interesting to explore in the beginning, like how different, giving out a hand of dice, but then those dice themselves trigger separate percentage rolls, and how important it was to actually separate those two for clarity and for the player to actually understand, that felt to make something feel natural. Because otherwise assigning a dice that then, the things I played with early on where it's like assigning the dice and then the dice gets re-rolled, or a second dice gets rolled and added to it, or all these other ways of having kind of a predetermined hand of dice that you play. It's like somehow it's hard to get to communicate things to the player in terms of their relative chance of success. And so actually just the simplicity of saying like, okay, a 6 is a guaranteed success, and and with the 1 to 3 you've got access to kind of 2 levels of either fail or success, and then with a 6 and a 5 you've got access to like a higher level, like a kind of what I originally called like a boon success. And so trying to help players understand this, but ultimately actually just trying to make it feel natural, so that even if a player didn't kind of read the numbers necessarily or pay attention to them, that then just as like higher number means better chance kind of type logic that people could just ride on felt really important. But in that same way, it's an expressive space, I think, for Citizen Sleeper. Like the way that skills and dice interact in the game is really, that's where I try to make the choices happen for the player, rather than necessarily in the dialogue sequences. It's actually like, the decision to put a 1 on a bar shift and then like have a bad day is kind of like an expressive choice as much as it is also like a mechanical choice. And equally, like having a high engage skill in the game, which is like a kind of charisma skill in a way, meaning that you can get away with having a bad day at your bar shift and people will still give you tips because you're just a more charismatic person. That's where for me like the things become interesting, because otherwise it's just variables rattling around inside a machine. But actually like the when it becomes a decision that's expressive, I think that's where I kind of I can kind of see that in Disco as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that really reminds me of this moment. It's I suppose in Citizen Sleeper, it's a little bit of a spoiler because it's slightly late game at this point. But if you have a 1 and you are, you're feeling very, very tired and you're hungry and you need the energy and repletion, you can just go and work at the commune and you can still gain something back. And narratively, that's a really beautiful thing about this sense of community and that space where everyone is helping together. Like you can still bring a low energy version of yourself and you can still gain back the things that you need. You can still be replenished with the things that you need, because it's all about uplifting each other and helping each other. And I think that felt really poignant as well narratively in the game. I think that came across really beautifully.
That's really nice. I mean, yeah, I think that's what dice give you, right? Because people fundamentally understand dice just by looking at them, and so the idea of what a one on a dice represents in terms of luck, it's very symbolic to people, and so you can use it for that kind of symbolic gesture in a game to represent something that it's the interaction itself is just dragging a one on a dice to a little box and some text plays out. Every interaction in Citizen Sleeper is identical fundamentally, but it's kind of like it's that expressive framing and kind of the playing with the mechanics that interests me really.
Yeah, that's one of the really beautiful things about D6 as well, is that humans just like can recognize those glyphs right away and kind of have associations with them. That's why, like, when in Disco, when you roll a check and you hear that and then they just like pop there on the screen, even kind of even taking away the UI effects, the sound effects, just like seeing those symbols, like the brain kind of internalizes the meaning even before you've done the mental addition and been like, ooh, that was good, or like, ooh, that was not so good.
Yeah, definitely. That was pretty much my playthrough. It was just the low number. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean that's like a good.
Oh. Yeah, no, absolutely. You go ahead, Justin.
I think that's a kind of good distinction also that you were drawing between Disco and Citizen Sleeper, and that the ability to kind of like recharge in this very positive way in Citizen Sleeper is like very like apt and particular to that, whereas like in Disco you're someone who is Harry's like on edge for so much of that game, and it's really about like what do you like, how do you scrape yourself together, right? Like you can play that entire game just pounding speed and hallucinogens and cigarettes to get yourself through the day, and that is like, as you were saying, that's like a valid form of player expression that becomes like part of your identity, that you walk around with your like plastic tear bag and a cigarette constantly. And we kind of get at that a little bit with Disco's thought system as well, just like what thoughts do you fixate on and keep in your head, and what does that reflect about what you value, but also who you see your character as, because that's another little bit of asymmetrical or kind of subjective randomness there, because when you're internalizing a thought, you don't know what the outcome of it is going to be as the player. So all of those outputs are, we wanted the player to be thinking, what does Harry want to do right now, not like, how am I going to min-max here and there.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And I suppose that leads me into kind of redirecting this question towards Nate a little bit here, because with Wildermyth, obviously this is kind of like this almost storybook-esque narrative that you can construct for your own heroes and carve their own stories. I mean, I'll let you take over and explain it better, but yeah, how does this all feed back into Wildermyth?
Yeah, so first of all, I really like what Gareth was saying about expressive space. That's something that we thought about a ton with Wildermyth, where we wanted to create a space for the player to express themselves in their choices in stories, but then also with gear and with everything that they did. So when it came to the story moments and the story choices, and we usually only have in a given comic, 2, 3, 4 choices max. But we want to make sure that all of those are valid. Sometimes there are rolls on some choices. Sometimes they're not. Usually, if there are, we'll put the percentage chance of success there. If it is something that the character would have an idea of, like how good am I at climbing a tree, then we'll put a percent there. If it's something like, is this magic crystal going to be good or bad, then we won't necessarily put a percent there. But we'll let you know that it's a random outcome, because we want to be really clear about what you're getting into with that. But we really, at first when we were designing the events, we thought, oh, okay, there'll be a good outcome and a bad outcome, or there'll be here's 3 doors and you pick one and you get something, and we ended up going back and saying no. this is not fun. None of that. There are only different interesting outcomes. All the outcomes, we really want to make sure that they are valid stories that you can tell about those characters, and that as much as possible you know the direction of the story when you pick the choice. You don't know the full where it's going to go, but you have an idea of why you're picking it and like what it means to that character in that moment to make that choice. And that's how a big part of how we really encourage you to get attached to your heroes.
Attached is the right word, yes. Yeah, I really like as well that aspect of you. The player only gets the kind of percentage values based on the skills that they kind of already have insight into. It's about what would, on a meta level, what would the character know about themselves, because a player may be able to have insight over the game, but the character that they're playing as, the hero that they're playing as within the game, they're not going to know what this magic crystal is going to do they? But they also,
Right.
but they do know that maybe they used to go mountaineering and that they're great at climbing. So it just feels so good. It feels so narratively just beautiful. Mwah, chef's kiss. Just kind of like diving a little bit more into different nuances, I suppose, when it comes into reliability. I suppose one of the things that comes up within statistics, I'm a neuroscientist and psychologist by education, so I love talking about numbers and stats and chance and stuff. I guess there's always this kind of discussion around what happens when something bad happens, like bad outcomes, because they are going to happen to players. And it's quite a difficult thing from a dev perspective to be able to handle it in a way that's graceful for players, that feels narratively cohesive and feels important. So I suppose this question is quite a large, broad one. But really, like, how did you decide how to approach bad roles, as it were, in your games? Gareth, this time, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the entire design starting point for Citizen Sleeper is kind of like, was me thinking about how to bring tabletop ideas into games in a way that doesn't feel bad, or doesn't feel like I tried to unlock the door and then no, I didn't, and then okay, I'll go to another door, or this like trying to not just directly port tabletop over, but actually think about what kind of tabletop, what things will people accept in games, and how will they accept bad roles. And so I think the idea of a hand of dice was quite an early one for me, just in terms of thinking about giving people a selection of roles that they can then choose which to use for which thing, based on what they feel is most important to the character or to them, or what do they feel is the most imminent thing at that moment, was a really important kind of starting point. And I think I drew quite a bit of that from a tabletop game called Blades in the Dark that I really love, where the player has a lot of kind of wiggle room to push the DM, or to kind of like bank on an outcome. So in Blades in the Dark, it's like a D6 pool system, and you could do things like take on more stress to add more dice to your pool. You can do my all-time favorite thing in tabletop games, which is have a devil's bargain, where you basically just ask your GM to give you another dice in exchange for having a negative consequence that is unavoidable. So as if you take that extra dice, even if you succeed at the roll, you'll still get a negative consequence just for that bargain, and things like this. And it makes this really interesting play of kind of chance, obviously, but of player expression within that. And I always really liked that. And that was something that was like, okay, how can I get this into a game? This feels like a way to give agency, so that when you do get a bad roll, or you are in a bad situation, you at least feel that you've had your choices and your chances. And even if everything went against you in this one moment and you couldn't have done anything about it, you still can't be that frustrated, because you kind of the game has given you ways of kind of making choices. So that was really important to me. And then I think the other thing is, I constantly thought about, I think like Nate was saying, I thought about not giving like I thought about how I run games, how I run tabletop games, and I thought about the fact that I would never give my players like a bad outcome that wasn't interesting. And so when I was making Citizen Sleeper, I always made sure that if there was an outcome that could happen, that it had to be interesting. If I couldn't make it interesting or valid in any way, then it would get shelved, and I would just like find another way to do that. And so there are, you know, some quest lines and in Citizen Sleeper that can be failed, and there are some that can't, and there are some that you can't actually succeed at. And I still do a little like quest failed notification at the top, because that's also what the game is about. It's about, you know, not necessarily being able to do everything you want all the time, and living on the edge of destitution. And so, yeah, for me, it was such a big part of the entire design kind of process for Citizen Sleeper, was just thinking about like, how can I make players feel okay about not having their way all the time and having to deal with whatever life throws at them, basically.
Yeah, I'm just upset that I can't min-max my way to victory all the time. That's outrageous.
No.
Absolutely. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Disco is a story about failure in a lot of ways, and like how you respond to those failures. It's also like you're just thinking about failure in general. Like that is the basis of any plot, right? Like any story is a series of failures or delays or misdirections that somehow end in resolution. And you know, it's important to us also thinking about the kind of like tabletop origins of Disco to keep things moving forward, even when you're failing. And here, I think it's important to distinguish between the red checks in Disco and the white checks, which serve very different narrative functions. So white check is a kind of narrative gate or like a flow stop where you know, sometimes you'll pass one right away and then you'll feel like good, you'll just move forward. But we kind of expect players to fail many of them, or even most of them, at least once, and that is kind of a way to redirect the player's energy and say, you know, this is kind of permission to go do something else, go explore the area more. You know, a lot of Disco's gameplay loop is also about exploring a scene, exploring an area, exploring a character by just like talking to them more deeply, and those often get you modifiers that reopen those white checks and give you a little bonus. So it, you know, even if you fail a white check, the next time you come back, it's probably going to be like one notch easier or so. Whereas a red check, and those are like obstacles or puzzles. Like that's what we're dramatizing with that. Whereas a red check is like a moment of tension and drama where that is your only shot in general. And you know, it's not that we design this around like a PBTA kind of mixed results system, because it is a check result is binary here, but there are almost no red checks in the game that are mandatory. You can usually decline to roll those things.
Oh yeah.
And so that is also empowering to the player, that like you can see, but it's like, you know, when you see that red bar in the dialogue UI, and you know that's your only chance. Like how, even if the odds are 25%, you think it is still very, very tempting to click on it. And you know, again, coming back to that, like failure is actually what moves a plot forward in interesting ways. You know, as writers, like we spent generally way more time on the fail paths of our red checks than we did on the success routes. And as a consequence, like it's the red check fails that people tend to remember more, right? Those are like a lot of the iconic moments in the game. And it's because like it's failure is also an opportunity for character development, right? It's an opportunity for discovery. It's an opportunity for like, oh my God, I can't believe they put that in the video game, you know? And so like, you know, I think that is part of the, you know, one thing I want to say is like, I think in some ways the most important red check in the game is the very first one you encounter, which is like you meet this woman Clausia right outside your wrecked hostel room, and you can hit on her straight away. Like first thing in the morning, you wake up, put your shirt on, and make a pass at this woman. And we deliberately designed that check so that like 90% of players will fail it in like very spectacular fashion, and it's like a meme, right? Like a meme that I can't repeat on this call, I think. But everyone does it, and it's okay. Like we expect you to fail this check. The scene continues, and that kind of also gives the player it gives the player permission to fail, to try things that are not likely to succeed, and proceed that way. And it also shows them that like it's really fun to fail. That like you should kind of look forward to whiffing rolls periodically, and that's like critical in a game like Disco because like Harry's a very particular character. He is someone who has these self-destructive kind of risk-taking impulses, and we need to get the player like in that mindset from the jump, really.
I really like the way that you phrased that. It's permission to fail. I think that stood out for me a little bit. Also, I don't know this Harry that you're referring to. I only know Tequila Sunrise. I mean, I don't understand. But yeah, I think that
may have been a different game. I might be getting confused.
Well, yes. Nate, what about you? This concept of permission to fail, how does that resonate with you for Wildermyth in terms of narrative?
Yeah. Well, Wildermyth has a very different tone from Disco Elysium. For example, we're heroic fantasy, so we expect the heroes to succeed most of the time. We expect that most of the heroes will make it through the whole adventure, but we have death in there. We have all of these bad things can happen, and we want that to be okay. That was a big design goal, that it's okay to lose somebody. It's okay to lose your whole party and win anyway, and that the game will carry on and like honor that. So we threw up just everything at the wall that we could on this, because it's so common when I'm playing. If I lose somebody, I'm going to reload. Like that's just what I'm going to do. But we really wanted to make it okay to keep going with those stories where you fail. So the first thing that we did that's really obvious is the mortal choice system. So the first time that you go to 0 in a fight, instead of dying, you get this comic choice where you can fall back and take a permanent negative consequence for that character, but they're not dead and they can come back. And then the second time you go to 0 within a chapter, then they die for real. So that does a really good job of making a strong negative consequence that isn't totally crippling. That character is going to come back in the next fight. You'll be able to keep playing. That's the first thing. The second thing we do is, we have recruiting in the game so that if somebody does die, you can recruit a replacement. So we make death okay. And then we also have a legacy system. So at the end of the game, whether you succeed or fail, you can add all of the heroes to your legacy, which means that you can play with them in the future. And this really addresses a particular type of I guess rage quitting that I've noticed in myself. It's like, oh, I made this character, I really like them, they died. That sucks. So if you're naming your characters after your friends and then, one of your friends died, oh, Mark, what happened? It's like, I don't want to play this game anymore. But it's like, no, it's fine. They go into the legacy. You can pull them out in the next run through. Don't worry about it. So we kind of threw every mechanic that we could think of at this problem of making it okay for the player to continue in these situations. And on top of that, just as a general design principle, we always want situations to feel more scary than they actually are. We want the player, and this is true in D&D too. I run a couple of D&D games, and we always want the players to think that they're going to wipe, and then you want them to pull out a victory anyway. And that is something that we aim for however we can, with design mechanics, I played a ton of XCOM before we made Wildermyth, and XCOM gets into these death spirals where it's like if you lose a hero, then your other if you lose a soldier, your other soldiers start panicking. They're worse. They're missing shots, and it goes downhill fast. And we wanted to have very much the opposite pressure in Wildermyth, so that when one of your heroes does die, they have a heroic death. And generally what that means is they deal a lot of damage to the monster who killed them. That is the other half of the mortal choice that you can make, right? Like, is, okay, instead of pulling this guy back with an injury, he's going to take out that monster, and then we're going to win this fight. And that is sort of I guess it's negative feedback because it's pushing in the other direction. But that keeps you afloat if you're having a little bit of trouble. So we do that a ton. We want the fight to seem a lot more scary than it is.
Letting them kind of go down in that proverbial blaze of glory is quite a majestic moment. Narratively, it's really interesting as well. You get to have this opportunity to really feel like something spectacular has happened, and you've really made like a moment in time for these heroes and what they've done. I think that's a beautiful way to craft that together. I think something I've actually...
Good for Mark.
Yeah,
on his way
poor
out.
Mark. R.I.P. Mark. Resting forever. I think something that actually is a little bit more tangential, but I think we've all alluded to a little bit here, is how do we all feel about the notion of save scumming? So this is, for anyone at home who doesn't know what save scumming is, in games where you're able to manually save during your game, during a narrative event, you can save before you hit like a roll, for example. So say in Disco, you're about to roll for something, roll a check, you save beforehand, and then you go back in and then hoping you can get the outcome that you want. Some players are going to do it, some players aren't going to do it. And I suppose, to me, how did that factor into your design decisions? Because it still feels fun regardless of if you do it or not. So I suppose, how did you handle that too? Nate, this time, because I know you are a bit of a reloader yourself. So
Yeah, I am. I admit it. I'm such a wimp, basically. So yeah, we allow saving and loading. We do have an Iron Man mode, but we don't push it very hard. We allow it, but we do everything we can to encourage you not to need it. Because I feel like it does break. It breaks the story in your own head that you're telling when you do that. In the same way that it's like if you're playing a puzzle game and you have to go online to look something up, it kind of breaks the game a little bit for you in that moment. And it's not the end of the world, right? Like, it's, life is life. But we want to minimize that. We do have a mode coming up for our DLC where there is no saving and loading, but that's because that mode is much more gamey and much less story oriented. So we feel like there's a distinction in our game anyways. Like, if it's a pure like tactics challenge, then I think it makes more sense to not allow the saving and loading. But if you're really encouraging your players to care so much about their heroes and really get so emotionally invested, then there are going to be some players that care too much to go on when something bad happens, or if they just made a choice in a comic that led to an outcome that they didn't see coming. Like, no, he looks dumb now, I didn't want to do that, let me go back. You got to let him go back. I mean, in choices like that. Otherwise you're telling them that they can't care about these heroes. And for us, like, caring about the heroes was the most important pillar. And so we had to allow saving and loading. Yeah.
Justin, got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I empathize with Nate quite a bit. Like, in some ways we did everything we could to encourage players to not save scum, but we also allow it. Because at the end of the day, we want, like, Disco is not the complexity, the weight, the difficulty per se is in the narrative content, not the game's mechanical systems. And so, we wanted players to be able to have as like kind of cozy a time as they could, as they were like moving through this story in this world. At the same time, like, there are some things that we do to mitigate it somewhat. Like, a lot of there's a number of red checks in the game that happen relatively deep into a dialogue branch, so it's not necessarily a trivial amount of like re-clicking through to get back to some of those. Also, I gotta admit, like when I play other RPGs, like I tend to save scum, though. Like also, like some of the most like meaningful RPG experiences I've had have been ones where I did not. Right, I like let party members die. I like let it be let it get really messy and kind of you barely eke it out at the end. In Disco, there's one another kind of notorious red check example that everyone loves the Clausia check where you hit on her and wipe out. There's another check that like I am convinced like 98% of players reload if they miss, and that's in this church scene where you can turn a church into a nightclub and then dance, and there's a right. So there's a moment where you can get Kim, your very stoic, self-contained partner, to dance with you, and if you do, it's great. He cuts a rug on the dance floor, and it's like very fun. If you fail that check, you call him a slur, and he kind of breaks up with you for a moment, and it's a hard scene and one that again, it so many players like become very attached to Kim. The thought of like letting him down in that way just like breaks people. But the scene where you go and reconcile with Kim is one of my favorites in the game, and like we did. It's a very I consider that like a totally valid and in fact like quite meaningful player route to kind of get to a kind of high point with your partner, bottom out spectacularly, and then have to work your way to kind of rebuild that trust and see what that means for you, for that character. And you can also, with that reconciliation, you can be like, Kim, you're like taking it too hard, like I didn't really do anything that bad. Like you can really be a asshole in that scene. But I think it is also like where that's one of the places where we take Disco to places that most games, most stories don't. And even if only 2% of players can bring themselves to like have that be their route, I think it's worth having those in the game. Pretty important, actually.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I think knowing that there is that kind of 2% pathway that people who do persevere through it, they get their own unique experience of it, and it kind of pays off.
Yeah. If I mean, I say this sometimes, but we deliberately tried to pepper Disco and the Final Cut, especially with some of those like column 1 and 2% moments where you don't expect a lot of players to get them. They're sometimes very costly from like a production standpoint, to design and then QA and you implement some of these paths. But when a player hits them, that is like nearly always like one of the things that they take away, because it's this is a computer RPG. There's not a DM improvising across the table from you, but those moments are the ones where it's like, oh man, the like computer, or really the people on the other side of that computer like see me now, and that's kind of like where like I didn't know anyone could put this in a game. I didn't know I was going to find it. And if you have enough of those moments kind of threaded through, then there's a reasonably high chance that most players will hit one or two of them, and those are kind of real
so cool.
build playthrough defining moments. And no, it's like it's critical to what we do.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Gareth, bringing it back to safe scumming, I guess, after that really beautiful, eloquent answer. Do you have any opinions on it, or how do you feel as a designer or as a player about it?
Yeah, I mean, I took the alternate path of forcing people to not be able to save scum. I think because I myself, I'm very aware of the. I'm a big fan of immersive sims and stealth games, and I'm terrible for just like putting a save down and then just like try. I mean, I like playing those games like that. I like just putting a save down and then like trying out 10 different things I could do from that save, and I like that. But for Citizen Sleeper, I really knew that I wanted players to be forced to deal with the consequences of their situation constantly. And I also knew that the system I was making was really not going to have necessarily like big hinge points, right? It's very much like a spiral, a death spiral, and I want to keep you in the death spiral. Like, and so from early on, I committed to having an autosave system that has very little flex in it. I mean, it saves immediately after the end of a scene, but if you things don't happen in scenes. That's what makes Citizen Sleeper quite distinctly different to most RPGs, is that things happen in the decisions you make in your gameplay, rather than telling somebody, Renegade or Paragon, like, get lost or be my friend. There's nothing like that in Citizen Sleeper. And so I can leave players to reload a scene and make different dialogue choices. But for me, scenes are just there to let the player play out their potential decisions, to say to a character, I'll help you, or say to them, I won't help you, to make a promise or not make a promise. I don't commit them to that promise if they make it, but it's important for me that the player has that moment. And then I kind of like force them through an autosave system to have to deal with not being able to fulfill that or having to react to it. But I think that the key thing with that I realized is it puts a huge design weight on the game as well, especially when you're making a game where you're trying to keep people in a death spiral. Because you really can't you can't have death, because death kills the tension dead, right? Like if somebody dies and I have permadeath in Citizen Sleeper, then it's just not going to have the effect that I want. It's also going to give them a way out of the death spiral. And at the same time, if I allow them to reload the save and do the perfect run, it kind of like also not going to have that tension. So it really meant that I had to be incredibly precise about balancing and about how I kind of dangle things over the player, like dangle threat over the player. The game never tells you, for example, what conditions would lead to your death. I just imply what conditions might lead to your death. I have a health bar that's going down to 0, and I don't tell the player what happens when that gets to 0. So it's like Nate was saying, it's very much like that's a DM's trick of like, you want to be kind of like playing tension. And I have lots of clocks in the game, that count down to consequences in very scary ways. And that's a way of making somebody feel that things are getting worse and things are piling on top of them and they're having to deal with it without me actually just completely suffocating them within the game. And so I think for me, for Citizen Sleeper to work, I had to say, no, you get one save, and this save will constantly resave, every 20 seconds, and basically like, good luck, and try and get people to commit to that. But in the same sense that I tried to be generous and treat the players with a lot of care. So I thought a lot about that. I never wanted to put the player in a position where they felt their choice had been invalidated, or where they felt that kind of I was being cruel to them. And spoilers, you can't die in Citizen Sleeper, right? So you can get yourself into a deep hole and you can pull yourself back out of it, but I'll never let you have death as your escape. You're going to have to work through it. And it also means that it always had to be possible for the player to pull themselves out, because with no save to go back to, it's very easy for the player to get into a position where they can't win. But if you know that the player's got 10 saves stacked up, then you can be a lot more ruthless and you can say, yeah, look, just, turns out you can't make it any further. Or maybe if you're making a roguelike so this was a really big struggle in designing and building Citizen Sleeper for me, is like trying to balance it right. And still we have a lot of people in the Steam reviews and stuff saying like, oh, the game gets too easy and it loses its tension, and other people saying like, oh, this game is too intense, it like scared me away. And so it's an eternal problem, really. But it felt really important to me to commit to that, knowing that, you know, if it was me, I would be tempted to go back and reload that save. I think all of us are usually tempted to try and make things work out for the best. So I just had to build it into the game, but not just kind of take the option away from people, but actually, you know, build the whole game around the save system, in a sense, around like the kind of save system I was committing to. And one big decision I did make in terms of kind of saves and generosity towards the player in Citizen Sleeper, for example, is that every ending in the game, you can choose whether or not to basically leave or stay in the place that you are on the eye on the space station. And if the player chooses to leave, they get the credits. And then they can, and if they choose to stay, they get the credits. If they choose to stay, they get the credits. Then they get like a post-credits scene, and they can keep playing. If they leave, they get the credits. They get kicked back to the menu, and when they reload the save, they're reloaded to the exact point before they choose to leave, and so they can just run the scene again, choose to stay, and keep playing. And so you can actually see every single ending in a single playthrough in Citizen Sleeper. And for me, this was a really important kind of counter to saying that I won't let you have, you know, multiple saves. I won't let you keep stuff. It's like, I'm not trying to keep things from you. And there are obviously certain things you can only do in one playthroughs, but just in terms of seeing the endings, I wanted it to feel like the player did have choice there and could kind of also experiment with what they thought the correct ending for their particular character could be, and when they wanted to kind of walk away and when they wanted to keep going. So that was kind of like in a way, an important counterpoint to removing the possibility of not save scumming, but, you know, using a save to tell a story, I guess.
I like that a lot because it gets at there's kind of like two like fundamentally different aesthetics to a game that has that allows saves or has a generous save system and one that doesn't. Which is like, you know, if you play most any RPG or any stealth game, like you were saying, Gareth, it's in a way you're kind of acting like a director on a film who is like taking multiple takes and then just saying like, nope, trash that take. Okay, this is the take that goes in my movie. But in a way, if you think about it, like in some way, what is kind of like disappointing about that is that in some ways it allows like players to then create a perfect movie with no tension because the player just like passes everything. Like they get a perfect stealth outcome every time. And you know, of course, the drama comes in all the takes that they tossed out, right? But this is just like musing for a moment, but I've like often kind of wondered, like, could you make an RPG around that like notion of tossing out takes or like threads that didn't work out, even if that's actually where the drama and juice of the story is. But it's very, very different than playing an Iron Man mode, playing Citizen Sleeper or something where it's like, no, this is my reality. And you know, I especially love games that like don't even have save slots. It's just you open it up, hit continue, and that's it. That's your thing. It gives you a different attitude as you're playing, where it's like it's like a precious thing that you've got rather than a thing that you're editing as you go. You know,
That's cool.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I think like, you know, Citizen Sleeper is a game about luck, and that's the reason why dice is in there. And it's about, you know, when you live in poverty, or when you suffer from disability, or when you're otherwise exposed to structures that are going to crush you. You know, if you put a foot wrong, that's kind of, it's so important that feels that feels kind of present, and that you can't just be like, oh no, wait, I'll just do that again. Like, it's fine. Give me another shot at that job interview. I'll get it this time. You know, it doesn't work. But at the same time, that meant that I had to be generous and kind to the player, because otherwise it's kind of like, it's too much. You know, I don't want, there's something that I'm exploring, but I can't I can't just like beat them down with it and just to make a point. That's not how it's going to work. So yeah, I think there's a subtle nuance there about how a save system does become, I think, part of an RPG's like central identity, and you know, yeah, like you say, like what kind of role the player is taking versus the character and the characters in the game.
Yeah, as that was just all like a really, really interesting response to. I didn't realize until this discussion now how important the role that a save file has in an RPG setting or in a narrative setting. It's actually a very powerful tool and mechanic that a player can have in their repertoire, which I think is interesting. I just wanted to kind of bring the conversation down to a bit of a close now. I always like to finish these kinds of talks with a quick lightning round. So this is your opportunity to talk very briefly about any games that you would love to talk about, anything that has kind of like come up into your mind as we've been having these discussions. Very quickly, just take a minute each to just talk about something that you love. So for me, recently, a game that I'd love to recommend to everyone is I Was a Teenage Exocolonist. I don't know if anyone here has played it. I would thoroughly, thoroughly recommend it. It's a beautiful game, and it was fantastic because I had the opportunity to really challenge myself to not save scum. It's the first game I've actually done that properly for, and I'm very sorry I did that with Disco. And
we let you do it.
You let me do it. But with Teenage Exocolonist, I really challenged myself to just see what happened because I had no idea what was going to happen next. And I just thought it was fantastic. So please go give it check it out. I think it has a lot of the kind of narratives and discussions we've talked about here today. And I think you'd all be fans of it. And, just generally, I encourage everyone at home to go away and play, Mars Horizon. We've got a game, Mars Horizon 2, coming out soon as well. That's going to be talking a lot more to this kind of idea of reliability and the unknown and exploration, and trying to really bring players on that journey of exploring their own narrative and carving out their own path and being able to persevere through any failures that they come across as well, and still feel like they achieve victory or they still feel great at the end of it. So enough from me. Gareth, this time. Quick lightning round from you. Any games?
Yeah, seeing as we're speaking about RPGs, I would recommend my favorite small RPG that's actually now free on Steam, a little game called Alien Squatter, which is a wonderful little pixel art RPG where you play an alien who is in a refugee camp outside a science fiction city, and they need to find a way to pass through the border control. And each day you have 200 steps that you can use to like walk around the little refugee camp and meet characters. You have like random battles with like rats and bits of trash. And if you use up all 200 of your steps, you pass out and you'll have less steps tomorrow. But if you manage to, within your 200 steps, get back to your bed and have managed to eat a bit of food, then you'll have more steps the next day. And there's like 20 different ways to complete it to get through the border control. You can get like an official passport, you can sneak through, you can get into all kinds of weird stories. It's a very, very cool game. Very few people have played it. It's incredibly interesting. And it's free, so who wouldn't want to play it? And if you want to think about failure in RPGs, it's an RPG where you feel like you failed and you're always failing. Like there's very little opportunity for success. It's very fun. So that's Alien Squatter. And while you're on Steam, you can throw a wish list to Citizen Sleeper 2 if you're there. We're adding the dice system is getting an overhaul for the sequel, and one thing we're adding is a stress system, and exactly how that will kind of manifest will be, I think, interesting for people who like Forged in the Dark or Blades in the Dark, but also other RPG systems. So yeah, I'm once again going back to trying to figure out like how many more of these ideas can I steal from tabletops and bring them to video games. So if you'd like to join me on that journey, then Citizen Sleeper 2 is the way forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Gareth. Nate, over to you.
I don't I don't have an RPG that I'm playing at the moment, at least not a digital one. I've been, like I said, doing a whole bunch of D&D lately, which has been a ton of fun. What I thought we were going to talk about, I was going to say, is that like the main reason to have on a micro level bad rolls in games is that it makes games not chess. It means that you can't fully analyze the play space before. That's just a little minor thing.
No, I like that. I like that. Not chess.
I think, yeah, chess is a great game, but not everyone wants to play chess all the time. And so, like, having these negative outcomes means that you can't fully analyze everything ahead of time. And that's just really critical, especially for a tactical game, because otherwise it becomes a game that very few people can competently play, and it becomes incredibly hard to balance for those people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nate. That's a powerful end for you. Not actually an end for you. I'm sorry. I'm going to start that again. That was a powerful way to cap off your part of the discussion. Justin, for you, any games you'd like to highlight at all?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about RPGs where you fail all the time, I love Caves of Cud. It introduced saves not too long ago, so like, is it even really Caves of Cud? But it's great. I have never lived very long in it, and I just like adore it. That's a game that has kind of like nailed its like identity as like a thing about failing in this kind of like grotesque, random, like mutated world. It just kind of like percolates down through all parts of its design and aesthetic, and it's like not for everyone, but it really does something that no other RPG does, as far as I'm concerned.
Awesome. Spectacular. So, with that, I have talked all of your ears off for far too long. Thank you so much again to Nate, to Gareth, and to Justin for joining us today. We really appreciate it. To anyone watching at home on Steam, you can find in the episode description below. Sounds like I'm on a YouTube channel. You can find below in the little like thing, the square, you know what I mean. You can see all of the information from all the games that the panelists have been talking about, their projects, their studios, anything. Follow them on socials, etc. So please do go and check out all of the description stuff below. And with that, please enjoy Digital Tabletop Fest 4. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.